Let's talk about the Utah Jazz trading Jolton Joe Ingles.
Wait, I thought we were never going to trade Joe Ingles.
Well, that's what Ryan Smith said. I mean, Ryan Smith said it's crazy to think that they would ever trade Joe Ingles.
You're casual.
That's our guy, Joe. You know, like
never going to trade him.
You know, like Joey Buckets. You know, like I mean,
he's a brilliant guy.
I mean, holy cow. And he's also a Portland Trailblazer. Well,
too fucking bad, man.
Everything but his torn ACL.
Okay.
And
okay.
I digress. Joe Ingles is a Portland Trailblazer, and it is interesting to note that the reaction to this Joe Ingles trade has been passionate, as you would expect out of the Jazz fan base, because Joe Ingles is a guy that you expected to have a cup of coffee in the NBA and then likely go back to Australia, mate, and play in the NBL or whatever it's called there, and be a star in Australia again, right? But he's become part of the Jazz, but also part of the Utah Jazz community. And it's always hard to say goodbye to a friend like Joe Ingles. Mm-hmm. Now, I would more point to the fact that I think this is seeing a couple of months, Joe, because I do believe that Joe Ingles will be back with the Jazz in some capacity if he chooses to. But right now, this trade was necessary. So, Jake, what was your reaction when you heard they traded Joe Ingles? And how do you feel about that deal in total?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's no surprise that they traded him. I mean, once the ACL happened, it was like inevitable that was going to happen, that they were going to trade him. So I wasn't, obviously, like I didn't grow up in Utah. I haven't been, loathing Joe Ingles for the last 8 seasons. Like that's not me. So I obviously just didn't have as much emotion in it. I just more look at it from a X's and O's perspective. Hey, the guy tore his ACL. That happens in the NBA. All right, we need to trade him. That's just what it is. That's business in the NBA. But, I look at the trade. I feel like the first thing I want to say about the Joe Ingles trade is I don't feel like it signals a clear direction as to where the team wants to go. This trade doesn't say to me or doesn't have, hey, we're trying to win a championship written all over it, or, hey, we understand we're not winning a championship, so we're going to get, remarkably younger written all over it. It was kind of it more to me felt like a trade that they made sort of to make a trade. Like, hey, Joe's hurt, we need to move him, let's make a trade. A lot of people were saying, well, I've never heard of Nickeil Alexander-Walker or Hernan Gomez. Who are these guys? I got a couple of DMs about this. Who are these guys? Do they play defense? Are they any good? It's like, yeah, these guys are NBA players. I mean, they're not the best in the league by any stretch of the imagination. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is, he's an up-and-coming talent. He needs some work. But to me, when I look at the trade, it has, hey, we got to develop guys written all over it. And this is a team that doesn't develop players. That's the thing. You have Adrian Wojnarowski going on ESPN saying that the Jazz have a developmental program, and I love the guy. I love Woj. I respect the hell out of him. I love what he does, but I disagree with that a little bit. I think that the Jazz haven't done a great job developing players over the years.
No.
And I look at what's on the roster now and what you added yesterday, and I still maintain that Alexander Walker is very similar in terms of players to what you have to do with, your Jared Butlers and any other guy on this roster you got to develop.
But is he much different than Trent Forrest right now?
No, and that's my point. I don't think he's that much different. Like,
I think they're very similar.
They're very close, and I think their needs are basically the same. They're athletic guys who can handle the ball but need work on the shot. I mean, that's who they are. So my point just is with this trade, like when I saw this trade go down, I wasn't surprised that Joe was involved in it, really. I was just more surprised that it seemed kind of like a, just sort of like, I mean, I'm not trying to be negative, but it just wasn't like a big trade or like a trade that had a clear, direction behind it. I was more expecting them to, if they were going to make a trade, to make one that really signified, okay, this is the direction we're going, We traded more than we probably wanted to, but we got a guy in Eric Gordon, or we got a guy in Harrison Barnes, or we got this player that can help us now.
We traded Joe Ingles and his expiring contract, which had real value around the NBA, and we got this guy in return that's going to help us win a playoff series right now.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. And look, I like youth. I like young wings in the NBA. You got that. But I'm more with you, Jake. I don't see that the Utah Jazz develop young talent. I think if you look at Rudy Gobert, I think he's a great developmental example. He has turned himself into an incredible defensive player, but he has not developed very much at all offensively.
Right.
And I think a lot of that falls at the feet of the Utah Jazz. I look at the guy you shipped out in Elijah Hughes. Elijah Hughes developed himself by working with Chris Brickley last summer.
Yeah.
The Jazz didn't develop him much at all and didn't give him an opportunity to do so. I look at Jared Butler. I look at, go back in time. I look at Trey Burke. I look at any of these draft picks you want to point to. Dante Exum's a very good example. There was never development. And a lot of the issue was these guys didn't get development and minutes to refine that skill development. They didn't get the opportunity to grow and flourish in the Utah Jazz system. And really right now, the other guy you got to point to, and we're going to talk about the game last night, but you got to look at Donovan Mitchell and you have to ask yourself all this tension and all this turmoil that the Jazz have been dealing with in their locker room between Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. I think I can put a lot of that on the frustration at the inability to grow these two players. And I think that has a lot to do with the developmental program that's been in place. Now, from what I understand, Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck are putting in a lot more assets, funds, and humanity into player development for the Utah Jazz. And I think that's really needed. But right now, you are where you are because this organization has not, over the last decade, valued growth in youth. Yeah. And I think that's got to change if this trade's going to work.
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of people on Twitter yesterday were saying, well, the Jazz aren't done. And they may not be done. There may be another trade coming. That's a possibility for sure. But I was just mostly in a place yesterday where I was like, all right, you made this deal, but the opportunity that was Joe Ingles' contract, I felt like you fell short on execution just a touch. Like, I would have expected them to be a little bit stubborn with that and say, okay, if we're going to trade this and we're going to get rid of an expiring contract and the leverage that comes with that, that deal and that opportunity needs to be part of a deal for a difference-making player. And I'm not trying to hate on the guys that they got at all. I just think that they're average NBA players currently. So with the Jazz, last night we're watching this game. Yes, they had a nice night. Jeremy Bolton, I believe, tweeted at us, yes, this was, like I said yesterday on the show, it was a measuring stick game, and they won the game. Now, did the Warriors play their best? No, they didn't. Did the Jazz play their best? Yeah, they probably did for where they are right now. The Jazz had a nice night, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. I think that it was nice to see this team playing well again. I think the conversation around, does this team play better without Don or without Rudy was answered last night. I think that this team last night was you were shown that Donovan can run the show and do some good things.
Yes.
And I think that Don needs to learn, and this is my biggest thing with this team right now, and what I would be focused on if I was Quinn Snyder and this coaching staff. Donovan Mitchell needs to learn how to leverage his teammates and really leverage, the double team that comes to him to get it to open players. And when he learns how to do that, this team's going to take another step forward.
Well, I think that's a huge part of where they are. I don't see the Jazz making another significant deal. I don't. The shocking thing in this trade yesterday was not only did you give up an expiring contract, but you paid to give up that expiring contract, which is to say you gave up 2 second-round picks that are already in very rarefied air in your portfolio. So you gave up 2 future first-round picks, one to Portland, one to San Antonio. And you, in my opinion, didn't get much in return as far as value goes. And I don't see that this trade makes you a better basketball team right now. Does it give you another body that can contribute along the lines of what Joe Ingles did? Sure it does. Does it answer the question of who's going to take those minutes? Maybe. Quinn Snyder hasn't, historically, and this year we've watched it, Quinn Snyder hasn't played young guys. I mean, so now are you telling me that you traded for Walker, and you really think that this is a guy all of a sudden Quinn Snyder is going to start plugging in?
Yeah, I think the difference is that Walker's definitely further along than Jared Butler is, right? Like, or than these other guys are. There's to me, there's no doubt about that. However, I think the issue is that he's just not refined enough to warrant the minutes, and so you have to make a decision, and this is what I think people don't understand. At some point, this team is going to have to make a decision that, hey, we're going to develop our guys. We're making it a priority regardless of where we're at in the game. And I think everybody was talking a bunch of crap earlier in the year and last season when the Warriors were not as good and they were developing Wiseman and Kuminga and they were doing some things. And now you're seeing those guys contribute, and that's what I kind of want to see this Utah Jazz team do. Because at the end of the day, and we say this, I feel like almost every day. So for the folks who listen every day, this is kind of repetitive, right? But you're playing to win championships, or it's not good enough at this point. So with that in mind, you need to operate that way, and you need to develop these guys.
But does Nickeil Alexander-Walker play more minutes than Jared Butler? Because again last night, I am befuddled by the fact that you won by 26 points or something like that.
Yeah.
And Jared Butler plays 4 minutes.
It's not good enough.
Like
what are we doing?
This is my struggle. I don't understand this. You win convincingly, 26 points over one of the best teams in the NBA, and Doak is only playing 19 minutes in that game. What is the point? What are you hoping to achieve? And again, is this a Quinn Snyder issue? I don't know. Knowing the way that Danny Ainge operates a little bit historically, he's not a guy that, lords over the head coach and says, you're going to play this guy. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not historically how he's operated. But help me understand why against a team like Golden State that doesn't have a true center, like, with all due respect to Kevon Looney, and you're watching guys like Jonathan Kuminga last night running around, playing developmental minutes. I mean, there's no other way to look at the fact that Jonathan Kuminga played 23 minutes last night. For a young guy in the NBA, that's a good load of minutes. That's, to me, why is Azubuike not getting that kind of run? If this is truly the guy that now is past Hassan Whiteside, which I don't think is necessarily the case, because guess who played more minutes last night? Hassan Whiteside. Guess who contributed? Hassan Whiteside, I think, had 17 boards last night. You're seeing that he had like 71 blocks all in the first quarter. Like, Hassan Whiteside was a motivated basketball player last night, and you saw that. What is the point of playing Doak 19 minutes in that game?
Yeah.
Why are you playing Jared Butler 4 minutes? I don't understand that. And I appreciate very much that you're playing guys like Trent Forrest plays 23 minutes last night.
Yeah, and that's the guy. So that's the name that I think they're prioritizing right now is Trent Forrest. And agree or disagree, I just think that the way the minutes are being played out, that's what's happening.
What I think that says is that you're looking at a situation where you're going to run Jordan Clarkson and Donovan Mitchell at point guard when Conley's not playing.
Yeah.
And I think that they're happy to do that.
Yeah.
I think they are happy to have other guys. This was the luxury of Joe Ingles bring the ball up. I think that they're happy to have, Donovan Mitchell was on the ball for most of the game last night. And I think Donovan Mitchell, for only scoring 14 points, Donovan Mitchell had a huge impact on the outcome of this game. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's probably more likely the way that this team goes, because I don't see them, at least not from what I heard around the league yesterday, I don't see them going out and making a significant deal. What this Joe Ingles trade signals is that they're going to stand pat with the talent they have on the roster right now, and they're going to make or break with these guys.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that Nickeil Alexander-Walker plays a huge role for this team this year. that would be a complete 180 away from what Quinn Snyder's done this season. And I just don't see him doing that now in the middle of February.
Yeah.
That doesn't, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I
that
know what you
doesn't,
mean, yeah.
that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This trade doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Is it a horror show trade? No, it's not. You gave up two second round picks and you sent out an expiring contract in Joe Ingles, a guy that if he plays in the NBA next year, I think probably resigns here. But it was a nothing burger.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people got annoyed with me on Twitter yesterday when I said that, but this trade's a nothing burger.
Yeah.
It's not one of those trades where you're like,
I think for the fan base, it was a big deal because it's Joe. That's what I think. I think that the fan base, and this isn't a criticism. I just think that, this is like how it is. Like, I think that the fan base, without a doubt, glorifies Joe Ingles. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think Joe Ingles was a fan favorite, somebody who is loved not only by the team, but by fans. And I think that when you trade guys like that, people are going to be how they're going to be. They're going to be, emotional about it. And I think it was cool on Twitter to be like, oh, there's another trade coming. And sorry, Joe Ingles, we'll see you next year. And Joe's going to be back. And it just is what it is. But like for me, in the way I saw it, I was just like, yeah, this isn't surprising. I mean, he's got a torn ACL. He's on an expiring contract. Why? Like, you should trade him and then bring him back next year.
And overall, I think yesterday was probably a plus day. I mean, you beat the Golden State Warriors and you did it handily.
Yeah.
And I don't care who the Warriors had and who they didn't have. I don't care.
Yeah.
You beat the Golden State Warriors. When you look at the schedule in 10 years, you're going to see that you beat the Golden State Warriors. You ended their 9-game winning streak.
And I thought Don looked really fresh.
I thought Don did look fresh. And I think, by the way, I also think with that windmill the other night, he was trying to prove a point that, he can still get up and play at the rim. I think there were a lot of people who were questioning whether or not he had the ability to do that.
Yeah.
But listen, I'm not saying this trade's a disaster. I just think that where this team is right now and you can't look at it as, well, that's all we got for Joe Ingles, because Joe Ingles is nothing more than a rotational player at this point in his career.
Right.
But what you have to say to yourself is, what did we get for an expiring contract and 2 second-round draft picks? Not a whole lot. Hurts and go your mama is probably not even going to play on this team, right? Like, I mean, again, what is he making? $7 million or something like that? Like it's inconsequential. I don't know. I'm trying not to be too negative. I'm trying not to be a down, but I had hoped for a more significant deal that would set you up to have a better summer.
Yeah.
And I think that's my disappointment here, is I don't believe that this trade helps you in the future. Unless, Nickeil Alexander-Walker turns into, a really, because I don't view him as a superstar ever.
He's not a superstar.
I think he is a contributing offensive player who is a wanting defender. He's not refined at this point. But I would love to see him. I'd love to see him become, something like a Brickley guy.
25 minutes a night off the bench, 15 points, great defense.
Right, but he's got to learn to shoot the ball. I mean, this is the Trent Forrest thing. Like Trent Forrest could be a very solid contributor on this team if he could shoot threes consistently. But you can't play him in long stretches and you can't put him in at the end of big games because he's not a knockdown three guy. He's not a guy that you can rotate the ball to.
Right.
You don't need him to shoot 40% from three or anything crazy. You need these guys to shoot 30, 31% from three. Yeah. That's all you need them to do. Just make 3.5 out of every 10 you shoot. That's what this team requires. So right now, I think, again, in the playoffs, you're going to rely on guys shooting the three well. You're going to rely on Jordan Clarkson, Donovan Mitchell, and Bojan Bogdanovic to win you games. That makes me nervous.
Yeah.
That makes me nervous. And, you're hoping that Mike Conley, defies, Mother Nature and Father Time and, stays healthy. But right now, I just don't see that you committed to the talent that's going to win you more than an early playoff exit.
Agreed.
And that's frustrating to me.
But I will say, on the positive side, it could be worse, right? I mean, you could have. I think the one thing that they do deserve credit for is you didn't make a trade that killed you, right? You didn't make a trade that really you didn't the Kings situation with Halliburton and that whole thing.
Oh my God!
You know,
yeah.
like how people view that. The Jazz didn't do that. The Jazz didn't make a real boneheaded.
They didn't
trade.
make a mistake.
Yeah, and I think that also needs to be said. You know, I think when we talk about the summer, you know, this trade deadline for the Jazz was one of those situations where you needed to avoid making the big mistake with any trade that you made, and they did that. There's no doubt about that. But I agree with you. You know, I did feel some. I mean, disappointment is the right word. I was a little just disappointed with what they got back for an expiring contract and those 2 picks. I would have hoped, you know, that it was somebody who was a bit more established in the league. Somebody who you could be like, okay, we don't necessarily have to develop this guy, but this guy isn't someone who's going to give us 20 a night.
Right.
You know, but somebody who could contribute for 20 minutes a night for 10, 15 points, that kind of thing. Like, I think that's what you would have hoped for, but that's not what you got.
Yeah, and I also think the other part of this is that I'm waiting for Danny Ainge. I'm waiting for this new regime to do something significant. Because this trade, you know, philosophically speaking, trading Joe Ingles is not surprising. Like we've been telling you for 3 months, 4 months. Joe Ingles wouldn't be here after the deadline.
And that was before he tore his ACL.
Right? Like we knew this was that. So that's not the part of this. The part of this that is so surprising is that you didn't leverage that expiring contract by either holding on to it and using that money against the cap or trading it for you know, as you mentioned, you talked about Eric Gordon or, you know what, or using that contract somehow.
Any established guy in the NBA. Doesn't have to be a superstar. Doesn't have to be anybody who's crazy.
And now, by the way, the other thing that went under the radar last night, did anybody notice Rudy Gay missed last night's game with a sore knee?
Yeah.
You know, this has just not been your most productive offseason.
Now, this has been a rough 6 weeks.
And, well, but I think you look at the offseason and people got really excited about Eric Paschall and Rudy Gay and Hassan Whiteside and none of those 3 guys have really worked out splendidly well. None of those 3 guys have been a home run. And I don't know, by no fault of his own, I mean, Paschall plays well when he plays.
Yeah, I would give him I'd give him like a B- ish for the offseason. Like, I think that I understand the strategy and what you were trying to do, but the Hassan thing, it's no secret that, you know, there's been some concerns about Hassan's body language and his attitude out there on the floor and his effort at times. I think Paschall's been everything you wanted him to be. I think Paschall has shot the hell out of the ball. He plays good defense. He's real physical. Like, he's reliable. You know what you're going to get out of him.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that this team just got to get through the shit this year, frankly. Like, you just got to get through this season, get to the summer, and then the run to the NBA Finals in terms of roster transactions will begin.
All right, let's get some of your comments in here. Neville93 says they traded Joe. Wow.
So that sentiment is what I'm curious about.
Yeah. Did you think they weren't going to trade Joe Ingles? Like, were Jazz fans, were you shocked that the club traded Joe Ingles?
What does that mean? A, yes, were you shocked? But then B, what does it mean when you say, wow, they traded Joe? Are you saying, are you just heartbroken that he got traded? Are you upset and pissed with the organization? Like, what does that really mean? Because I'm curious about this. I saw this all over Twitter yesterday.
Cody Strickland, good morning. He says, morning, mighty men. That was very impressive game by the Jazz. Started off bad, ended so good. Could you be wrong about the Jazz postseason? What does this game last night have to do with their postseason abilities?
If you're saying to yourself this morning, the Jazz beat the Warriors, and that means they got a good shot in the postseason, you don't understand where the Warriors were last night and where the Jazz are.
And that the game is completely different in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, with all due respect, and I'm not trying to be an a-hole about it, if you will, but
like, be an a-hole by saying...
Like, it just is, it's a ridiculous take. Like, dude, the Warriors didn't play Klay Thompson last night. Draymond Green is not playing. You know, your Steph did play decent. You know, I mean, he didn't have his best night ever, but
he doesn't play well against the Jazz. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think that I think that it's foolish to be like, oh, well, they beat the Warriors, that means that they're going to have success. And I mean, that's just not realistic.
Well, and I think in a series, and when you look at the guys that were resting, you know, I mean, Klay Thompson just didn't play because of rest.
Yeah.
Dre's out with this injury. Like, I think this is a different team in the postseason.
Bro, the Warriors are on pause for the postseason. Let's just be 100% real.
They
about
have
it.
nothing to prove here. They need to get
Yeah.
through this last 20 games healthy.
Yeah.
That's really what they need. Edgar Garcia, what's up with you? Funky Orion says, good day. Snuka says, buenos dias, muchachos.
Hey, guys.
Yeah, hey, what's up? Rudy Sanchez says, morning, fellas. I got a little carried away. Sorry. Cody Strickland says, really, Neville? That's a shock. That was gonna they was gonna trade him before the injury. Yeah, totally. Brylark said, we've said this since the offseason. The Jazz were going to trade Joe Ingles, and none believed us. Good work, Jake and Monty. Thank you. I appreciate the tip of the cap.
Thank you.
Edgar Garcia says, Jazz looked good. Donovan seemed to try and involve his team more. Absolutely.
See, and so this is something I really love talking about. So this is something we've been talking about with Don for a minute. Like, we were waiting for Donovan Mitchell to develop into a player who understands how to involve his teammates. And last night, you see what just a little bit of that can do for this team. And so that's why I think, like, this team has a lot left on the bone. And what I mean by that is if Donovan Mitchell learns how to involve his teammates and manipulate the defense into double teaming him, only to move the ball to the corner to someone like Bogey who's wide open, let's say, they're going to have a lot of success. And that's what I think wasn't happening. The whole thing about Don and everybody else can't keep happening if he wants to be a championship player.
Well, and again, I know I say this every day, but the drive and kick component of this offense has been non-existent, and it's vital. They shoot the three too well, and there's too much double teaming and collapsing on Donovan Mitchell. So Don's got to progress, and he's got to believe in his teammates.
Yes.
And we saw it last night, the drive and kick game where Jordan Clarkson is standing wide open all alone.
Yeah.
That's when he's going to make threes.
Yes.
I mean, so I think that's a great point. I really do. Edgar, I think that's exactly right. Dane says, good morning, boys. James Knight, how are you? He says, here we go. Rip City, baby. Free agency, baby. Yeah, I think, listen, if there's a team, screw you. If there's a team that got better in the last couple of days, it's the Portland Trailblazers. The Portland Trailblazers are set up to have a monster summer.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to take a run, one more shot with Damian Lillard. And I think if they are not able to build something significant around Dame this summer, then I think you can start talking about him not being there. But I also think if you look at the Blazers, they have all kinds of momentum. They go out and they beat a hapless Laker team last night. And I will continue to say Russell Westbrook is not the biggest issue for the Lakers. It's Anthony Davis. And when he plays well and he actually rotates on defense, they win games. And when Anthony Davis is a lazy ass, the Lakers lose.
Yeah.
And again, I think they need to ship Russ out today, and I think there's a good chance they do that.
Yeah.
But the Lakers' biggest problem is Anthony Davis, not Russell Westbrook.
Yep.
But here nor there, the Blazers beat the Lakers last night, and LeBron had another virtuoso performance. Like the Blazers are set up. The Blazers are in good shape. I think they are right now. They would be the winner at the deadline in my mind. Now we got to find out if James Harden's going to be a Sixer and if Simmons is going to be a net. Like this ridiculousness with Woj reporting this morning that James Harden is not, requesting a trade because he's worried that it's a bad look. Guy, we're way past that.
You're talking about a guy in James
that.
Harden who intentionally, put on weight to get out. You think James Harden gives a damn what the public thinks?
I do.
Come on,
I
guy.
think James Harden is worried about his. He should be.
Fat.
James Harden, and again, I don't think James Harden's fat. I really don't.
Not anymore. He was when he tried to get out of Houston.
I think, yeah, probably. But I think that James Harden is a guy who can't handle losing, and when he loses, he crumbles. And I think he wanted to go to. I think the biggest issue for him was he thought it would be him and KD.
Yeah.
That's what I think. And you wind up with Kyrie staying there in the long term, and I think everybody thought that the Nets were going to dump Kyrie when he wouldn't get vaccinated and can't play at home. Well, guess what? They didn't. And then James got hurt, and they lost in the playoffs, and he became a scapegoat. And
Kevin became the god.
And he crumbled. And he wants out of Brooklyn now because the guy – and this is why I say this is very much the example of some guys are championship material and some guys are not.
Yeah.
James Harden, in my opinion, is not a championship caliber player.
So Philadelphia naturally would want him.
Yeah, well, but I also think that when you put James Harden in a situation where he's a good fit, all of a sudden, fat ass becomes motivated and he's not such a fat ass anymore. Right? So he's motivated when he shows up in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Conditions, gets in shape, hurts his hamstring. Well, why did he hurt his hamstring? Because all he was doing was conditioning to get back in shape.
Yeah.
And he's never gotten over that hamstring, number one. I don't know that people realize that. The guy has been playing on a leg and a half. Like, that hamstring has been an issue for James Harden.
Yeah.
He's not the same athlete that he was in his prime in Houston.
Yeah.
But the other thing you got to know is if you put James Harden and Joel Embiid together, and if you can keep Thibault, and there's a lot of people reporting that this cough hasn't gone away yet. They're also reporting that the holdup in that deal in Philly is that the Nets want Thibault, and that Daryl Morey and the Sixers won't give him up. And you know, if you send out James Harden and Patty Mills and a draft pick, and you end up with Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris, let's say, or they also, I think, would really like Tyrese Maxey in Brooklyn. I was talking to a guy yesterday after the Jazz trade, and Brooklyn really wants Tyrese Maxey.
Yep.
I'm not giving up Tyrese Maxey. I'm sorry. That kid has superstardom written all over him.
Yeah.
I would trade Thibault. That's just me, though. I would not trade Maxey. I would much more quickly trade Thibault than Maxey.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the issue for Philly with the Thibault situation is that giving Brooklyn Thibault really helps Brooklyn more than
it gives you
Patty
a weapon
Mills.
to beat you.
Yes, exactly. And I think that Thibault, because of the tenacious defender he is, I mean, he would make a huge impact for the Nets, a team that already struggles with defense. I mean, I think that's why there's a hesitation around Thibault. But again, I'm still the guy that says the Sixers should be operating with the mindset of they need to ship out Ben Simmons.
I think the Sixers should be operating with desperation. Frankly,
Yeah.
I mean, if we're being honest about it,
Yeah.
I think the Sixers should be desperate because you're having and I don't mean to make too much of it, but you're having a generational season out of Joel Embiid.
Monster season.
I mean, this guy, he's going to win the MVP.
Yeah.
I have no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And you're going to waste that unless you make a Ben Simmons trade today.
Too bad.
You know what I mean? But seriously,
Yeah.
you're going to waste that season out of Joel Embiid if you don't make this trade today.
Yeah.
And so it makes me wonder, are they willing to give up a Thibault? I would never, again, I'm not trading Maxey, no chance.
Yeah.
No chance. I'm just not doing that deal. Cody says he will be back in Utah very soon. Rather a player or an employee, I rather have him on the broadcast. Yeah, maybe Joe Ingles can replace a certain somebody.
I with all due respect, I understand why Joe Ingles gets romanticized. If you want the guy on the broadcast, cool. But if it's me and I'm running the team, he's not my off-season priority. He's not. I love the guy. And I'm happy to have him back in a broadcasting or maybe even a.
I would hire him as an assistant.
What I would
do? I would hire him as a developmental assistant, and hey, have him work with my young guys. Have him work on mentality. Like, have Joe Ingles be around the team.
You need him in the locker room.
Yes, I would have him around. And I would, listen. I never thought watching a broadcast that I would ever say in my entire life that I miss Matt Harpring. I never thought, I thought at times during Harpring's Jazz broadcasting career, I'd rather cut my nuts off than say I miss Matt Harpring. Anyway, the point is, I miss Matt Harpring.
If you felt these balls.
Wow.
The Jazz broadcast is unlistenable at times.
Butthole.
If you add Joe Ingles and his butthole to the broadcast, my feeling is it gets better.
Y'all feel me?
We should move on. Greg Hawkins says, sup, Monty and Jake. Sup, chat.
Hello.
Greg Hawkins,
Hey, guys.
a TikTok superstar.
Seriously, congrats, bro. That's
Way to
pretty
go.
pretty fire, bro.
Greg Hawkins, you're a stud. Victor G says, "What's up from Manila?
What up?
Is Jordan Clarkson being shipped out?" That again, speaking of cutting balls off, I'd be stunned. No, I'm never doing that. I'd be stunned if the Jazz made another big trade. I think Bogey and Clarkson stay, but
I'm going to say this again.
Eric Tavares says Don is dishing, getting his team involved in the next step for his rise to the next level. Joe has expiring contract and will be back with the Jazz as a free agent with a smaller deal, possibly.
But here's my question, though. Why is everybody boned over Joe Ingles coming back to the team? This is my question. Like the conversation shouldn't be, oh, they traded Joe. Joe's going to be back next year. Yes. That's not the conversation.
Okay, so what is Joe Ingles if he comes back next year? He's a mid-30s guy coming off of an ACL rupture, and he already showed you with his ACL intact that he was diminishing.
Like, take Joe Ingles' name and put it over here and just read the description of who he is as a player. If you didn't know it was Joe Ingles, you probably wouldn't want that guy on your team, right? So my question is...
I would agree.
So my question is, why is the focus on whether Joe Ingles is going to come back next year? Who gives a damn right now?
And I'm telling you, and I might be totally off on this, and I guess I'll go to my grave with it. Speaking of cutting my balls off, thank you. I think Elijah Hughes is a very good role player in this league, and the Jazz never gave him an opportunity. We saw him really have one good moment.
Yeah.
When it was rookie ball. And he went out there and knocked down 8,800 threes in a game, and we never saw him again.
Nope.
He got COVID, and once he had COVID, he never got back into the rotation. And it's
the coronavirus.
It's shocking to me, that Elijah Hughes never got a chance to shine. He was great in the summer league. He was great when they gave him an extended look.
Yep. I
thought him and Pascal played really well in that game. And by the way, what happens now with Daniel House? Like, I'm curious about what happens with him.
I really want them to sign him the rest of the season. I like what he brings.
I think you get that news today because if Daniel House is out there hanging out, because, by the way, he's already signed 3 10-day contracts, if memory serves. If Daniel House...
Yeah, they have to make a decision.
They would have to sign him the rest of the season. If he's just out here hanging out, there's a chance he's not going to be available to you after today.
Yeah.
So I think he's probably a guy you bring back for the rest of the season. I don't know. Frank H. says the Jazz have developed countless players: Hayward, Gobert, Hood, Mitchell, Favors, Ingles, etc.
Rodney Hood is the guy that
Rodney Hood developed?
He didn't develop, number one. He didn't develop. And what were some of the other names?
Gordon Hayward.
Gordon Hayward developed.
I think Gordon Hayward was a star in this league.
Yeah.
Rudy Gobert is not developed. Defensively, he's elite. But can you really say that Rudy Gobert is developed?
I guess we need to define what development is, because I honestly don't think that Rudy has developed that much.
Development is an all-around basketball talent that you got him as a rookie and he turned into XYZ.
Steph Curry.
Right? Like, that's development.
Yeah.
Rudy Gobert is a very limited player. Now, his limitation happens to be defense, and he's elite. The limitation on the negative side is he doesn't have an offensive game. He is a pick and roll player who has to have a team that misses shots.
Yeah.
You cannot give him the ball in the post and expect him to do well unless it's a lob. That's the reality of it, Frank. Brandon Whiteside says the moves save the Jazz $11 million. Maybe there were no big players available. I completely disagree with that. I can tell you for a fact that if they had, and I know they tried, but an expiring contract like that, 2 second-round picks get you far more than what they got. You know why I think the Jazz made that deal? Because they were worried that they weren't going to make another deal or have the ability to make another deal. And they got, I think as soon as Boston cut them off, because the Jazz were talking about Josh Richardson and Marcus Smart. But as soon as Atlanta and Minnesota and as soon as really Minnesota got very serious about Marcus Smart, I think that the Jazz were in real trouble at that moment. And I know that the Jazz, that's why I think the Jazz from what NBA sources have told me, the Jazz tried to get into a three-way deal with Washington. They were not able to do that. They were heavily pursuing Harrison Barnes from Sacramento. But as soon as Sacramento traded Tyrese Halliburton, I mean, I don't know that they were going to be able to trade Harrison Barnes because they are hell-bent on making the playoffs. And trust me, friends, they have a lot of climbing and digging to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it in no way, shape, or form, is it accurate to say that no players were available for trade in this league? Because the bigger issue here is, I think the Jazz knew that their best opportunity to rebuild this team is going to be this summer.
Yeah.
And it's going to be around the draft and in free agency when they're able to make trades. Because, I mean, I think you better come around to the idea that they're going to tear this team down. And when I say tear this team down, your top 6 players are going to change.
Yeah.
You just got to understand that. I think the Utah Jazz realize that Bojan Bogdanovic, Royce O'Neal, and Jordan Clarkson are not good enough.
Yeah.
I think they know that. I think you could handle Jordan Clarkson if you had more reliable wings who could help you defensively. The issue is that this team is built to feed every offensive possession from their opponent into Rudy Gobert. And I think that Dennis Lindsey vastly overestimated Rudy Gobert's ability to be a do-everything defender. Because he's not. There is no such thing in the NBA as a do-everything defender.
That logic is just whack.
And the other thing that I think you have to realize is that when you allow your wing players, your perimeter players, to feed everything into your center, they better be quick and athletic enough to get out to the line after they let that happen. But the Jazz don't defend that way. The way the Jazz defend are everybody collapses into the paint when penetration happens and the opponent is kicking. And Bojan Bogdanovic is not athletic enough to get back to the stripe. You know, you have a guy in Donovan Mitchell who has to learn on the go to defend at a very high level.
Yeah.
And I think it's very difficult to do that because learning offense is very instinctual. There's a lot of natural ability that goes into being an elite offensive player. Some guys just pop out of mama, ready to score the basketball. Don is that guy.
Yeah.
Defense in a lot of guys is taught. And I'll flip the switch on Rudy Gobert. The example of the exact opposite of Rudy Gobert is DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton is a gifted offensive player.
I'm for real.
Who can't catch a cold defensively most nights. Like, he is a guy who has attachment issues. DeAndre is not a tough physical guy, so he's not going to try and knock you out. Rudy Gobert his arms are as long as a 747's wings, man.
Yeah.
Like, he is a naturally gifted shot blocker. He has tremendous athletic ability to recover. Rudy Gobert is the kind of guy who can see angles to get him to block shots, to get him into position to change shots.
Yeah.
The problem is that oftentimes doesn't work defensively for the Jazz because when a guy gets in front of Rudy Gobert, naturally he's going to want to kick. And everybody's so compressed into the paint for the Jazz defensively that it leaves them exposed. So when you talk about development of Rudy Gobert, I would beg to differ. And when you talk about development, look at every guy on this roster. Their defense has not gotten better. It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
It's become more porous. Like Royce O'Neal has been billed as this elite on-ball defender. He's not an elite on-ball defender. He just is not. And I think that's why you're going to see the top 6 on this Jazz team is going to change dramatically.
The athleticism of this roster needs to go way up.
Dramatically. Cody Strickland says, Monty, it was 2 second-rounders. Yeah, 1 to Portland and 1 to San Antonio. I corrected. I said first. It's 2 second-rounders. I corrected that. Braden Christensen says, I think the Jazz really tried to go after players to make this team better, but couldn't make those deals happen. That's exactly right.
100%. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
100%.
I think they would have been thrilled to land Marcus Smart. Atlanta and Minnesota made that impossible. I think the Jazz had real legitimate interest in Karis LeVert, couldn't make that deal happen. I think the Jazz would have liked to have ended up with Montrezl Harrell. I think there's too much interest in Washington. Was not going to make a deal on an expiring contract in long-term first-round picks. They were not going to do that because the Jazz don't have a first-rounder to trade until, I want to say it's 2026. I mean, you're talking about 3-4 years from now. So that's not of much value. So I think that the Jazz see that they had a need for a backup point guard. Yeah. Well, they addressed that by playing, Jordan Clarkson and really it's Donovan Mitchell on the ball. But you can see, that they're going to have different guys bring the ball up. Okay, I'm good with that. Fine. When Mike Conley's not in there, I wish it was Jared Butler. It's not. The issue is that they have massive holes defensively. Mm-hmm. That's why this team will lose in the playoffs. It's not their offense. They can score with anybody. Their issues are defense. So, yeah, I think they tried to make significant deals, and it's just not there. Teddy Wayman says, morning, guys. Sad to see Joe go, but I think it was the right move. Absolutely. Cody says, I'm not going to bag on Trent Forrest. He played great. Threes need work, but still was good. Yeah, agreed. Man, I think Harden is not a championship player, Cody said. I won't stop asking for a trade. He won't stop asking for a trade. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think James Harden wants a convenient situation. I think he wants, he wants to just step
that's
into,
a good way to say that.
He just wants to step into something that's already good. And I think, I agree with Cody. I think that James Harden is somebody who is probably pissed he didn't win the MVP in Houston. And I think that, he's been trying to get back to that level for a minute now. And I think, when you play games with your body, you go through injuries, which is exactly what he's done in Brooklyn. And I think Philadelphia, when he gets there, because it's not if, it's when, and it's a matter of time. I hope it happens today. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see what he can do with Joel playing this well. But if it doesn't happen today, if it happens this summer, James Harden needs to win championships in Philly. And if he doesn't, I think that the Hall of Fame candidacy is a little rough for James. I think he's a hell of a player. But championships matter.
And I think he's not an all-time guy unless he wins multiple rings. One ring is no longer good enough in the NBA.
No.
Elite players have multiple
One
rings.
ring is NFL. Yep. You need multiple in the NBA.
Brylark says, Quinn continuing to piss away opportunities to develop his young guys late in these blowouts and letting Rudy develop his offense when he plays.
Yep.
Yep, I agree.